Right, good morning. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming along. Hopefully, what you can see at the moment is me. I'm Nicola, and hopefully you can also see the first page of Jekyll and Hyde on the board. And just before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the purpose of this is. And essentially, one thing that I'm noticing with lots of my students at the moment is that they are learning huge amounts about technique and context and character and themes and all these wonderful, wonderful things that are so important when you're writing your essays about Jekyll and Hyde. What I'm noticing, though, is that so many of them don't actually know the story. And I feel sad. I feel sad for Robert Louis Stevenson, who, when he sat down to write this book, did so to tell us a story. He didn't write it with the thoughts of GCSE English literature in his head, I don't think. And we do him a disservice, don't we, if we don't sit down and actually enjoy the story as it was meant to be enjoyed. But if we want to put our slightly cynical exam-focused hats on, also, it is really important. We talk about context a lot in terms of history and what's going on at the time he was writing and all that sort of thing, which is all really, really important. But we sometimes forget about context in terms of the text itself. When we talk about character or themes and we don't put it in the context of what is actually happening in the story, we miss stuff. We miss some of the really important stuff about how Stevenson has chosen to guide us through his thoughts. And so as readers, yes, we want to be thinking about all these things of themes and characters and stuff like that. Of course we do. Motifs, symbols. Gosh, there's a lot of symbolism in here, isn't there? But we need to see what's happening when that happens. And we need to be able to talk about that when that happens. So the chat is open, but also if you are here and you are not able to put something in the chat, or if you wanted to watch this and come in halfway through, this should, I believe, stay up on the YouTube channel and you'll be able to watch it whenever you like, okay? Now this morning we're just going to read the first chapter, and what we're going to do, we're going to read it through, but we're going to think about it as we go as well, okay? I will warn you, I've got the text on the board. I will warn you that it's not perfect text. It's a PDF I downloaded, and there are a couple of typos and things like that in there. I'll try and point them out as I go. I'll be actually reading directly from this version, which some of you may have, but we're just going to look at the story of the door at the moment. And so just to set the scene, we already know this is late 1800s London. And if you're not aware of this, and I'm sure your teacher will have talked about this an awful lot, but late 1800s, we're talking about London that is dark, smoggy, that has lots of narrow corridors, that in some areas feels lawless, in other areas feels glamorous. This is the London of Oscar Wilde. It's also the London of Jack the Ripper. This is a London with lots and lots of things hidden away behind closed doors. It's the Industrial Revolution has pretty much peaked. So we have all that smog, we have that poverty in the background, that sort of thing. We have a concern about morality, both amongst the wealthy and the poor. And we have a really, really deep interest in science, development, progress. Science is really exciting at this point. Electricity is starting to be used more and more. We're starting to see people, developing medical procedures and things like that. And it's got to that point where science has gone a little bit mad. Some people are moving off into ideas about communing with the dead or bringing the dead back to life. But also, some of this stuff turns into quite, what sensible science we see today. And this is where we are. Okay, this is the London we are in. And this is the story of the door. Now, as we read, as I say, I'm going to have my highlighter ready just in case there's stuff that comes up that seems interesting. I'm going to be looking particularly in this first chapter, if you remember this, at character, because we're going to hear a lot about one particular character first of all. Okay, the story of the door. Mr. Utterson, the lawyer, was a man of rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile. Cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse. Cold, scanty, and embarrassed in discourse. Now, what does that mean, I wonder? Well, I think what that means is that he doesn't say very much. So, a bit quiet. And never lighted by a smile. So I can say he doesn't smile. He's not sounding great so far. And rugged countenance just means kind of a red of cheek, that kind of a country air, kind of skin that you get, or possibly after a few too many of those. Backward in sentiment, lean, long, dusty, dreary, and yet somehow lovable. Ah, now here we're getting somewhere, aren't we? Yet somehow lovable. Doesn't sound very lovable, but apparently he is. At friendly meetings, and when the wine was to his taste, something eminently human beaconed from his eye. Something indeed which never found its way into his talk, but which spoke not only in these silent symbols of the after-dinner face, but more often and loudly in the acts of his life. Now, acts of his life. Something eminently human. So we're starting to get a bit more of an idea about him here. He is human. I'm going to turn that into humane. There's something humane about him, something maybe perhaps we want to think about the word compassionate and the acts of his life. So he does good rather than seeming good. Okay. He was austere with himself. The word austerity was around a lot in recent years. You may be familiar with that. To be austere with yourself is to deny yourself things. Drank gin when he was alone to mortify a taste for vintages. And though he enjoyed the theatre, had not crossed the door of one for 20 years. So there are things he likes, expensive wine, going to the theatre, but he denies these things to himself. So, self-denying. And we're starting to get a sense here. This is Stevenson laying out his stall. This is Stevenson saying, this is what a good guy looks like. This is what it means to be moral. Somebody who doesn't smile, somebody who is humane, someone who is self-denying. Utterson here is being created to show Stevenson's reader who the good guy is and whose kind of moral compass we are supposed to follow. Right. But he had an approved tolerance for others, sometimes wondering, almost with envy, at the high pressures of spirits involved in their misdeeds, and in any extremity, inclined to help rather than reprove. I incline to Cain's heresy, he used to say quaintly. I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. In this character, it was frequently his fortune to be the last reputable acquaintance and the last good influence in the lives of down-going men. And to such as these, so long as they came about his chambers, he never marked a shade of change in his demeanour. So, what we're talking about here is someone who is, I'm going to use the phrase, judgmental. This is a person who sees people doing bad things, but doesn't judge them, doesn't in any way sort of punish them for it. And so it was frequently his fortune to be the last reputable acquaintance, the last good influence in the lives of down-going men. There we go. Okay, so we're starting to get a sense of who this guy is. No doubt the feat was easy to Mr. Utterson, for he was undemonstrative at the best. And even his friendship seemed to be founded in a similar Catholicity of good nature. I've never managed to get that word out in one go, ever. It is the mark of a modest man to accept his friendly circle ready-made from the hands of opportunity, and that was the lawyer's way. His friends were those of his own blood, or those whom he had known the longest. His affections, like ivy, were the growth of time. They implied no aptness in the object. Hence, no doubt, the bond that united him to Mr. Richard Enfield, his distant kinsman, the well-known man about town. Now, I'm going to highlight this in a different colour because we're being introduced to a new character here. So this is his distant kinsman, so probably like a cousin or something like that. He is in some way related to him. And the well-known man about town. Now that's kind of a euphemism. It means he's a guy who is out and about, probably, moving in glamorous circles, that sort of thing. But again, although this doesn't sound like the sort of guy that Utterson, who we've just seen, would be particularly drawn to, Utterson takes the friends who are given to him. He doesn't go out and seek out a particular type of person to be his friend. It is the person whom he has known the longest that he decides to hang around with. It was a nut to crack for many what these two could see in each other or what subject they could find in common. It was reported by those who encountered them in their Sunday walks that they said nothing, looked singularly dull, and would hail with obvious relief the appearance of a friend. For all that, the two men put the greatest store by these excursions, counted them the chief jewel of each week, and not only set aside occasions of pleasure, but even resisted the calls of business, that they might enjoin them uninterrupted. It chanced on one of these rambles that their way led them down a by-street in a busy quarter of London. The street was small and what is called quiet, and it drove a thriving trade on weekdays. The inhabitants were all doing well, it seemed, and all emulously hoping to do better still, and laying out the surplus of their grains and coquetry so that the shop fronts stood along that thoroughfare with an air of invitation, like rows of smiling saleswomen. Even on Sunday, when it veiled its more florid charms and lay comparatively empty of passage, the street shone out in contrast to its dingy neighbourhood, like a fire in a forest, and with its freshly painted shutters, well-polished brasses, and general cleanliness and gaiety of note, instantly caught and pleased the eye of the passenger. What a lovely image! It is busy, it is colourful, it is lots of people living their lives in a clean and wholesome sort of way. What an interesting description of a part of London. So again, I'm going to take my highlighter again, and those of you who are actually taught by me will know I'm very into my colour coding. I do like a bit of colour coding. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to down here and there, and I'm just going to make a little note here. I'm going to say this part of London seems wholesome and pleasant. Okay. Two doors from one corner on the left hand going east, the line was broken by the entry of a court. And just at that point, a certain sinister block of building thrust forward its gable on the street. Certain sinister block of building. Let's just pop that down. This is going to be important, isn't it? It was 2 stories high, showed no window, nothing but a door on the lower story, and a blind forehead of discoloured wall on the upper, and bore in every feature the marks of prolonged and sordid negligence. Prolonged and sordid negligence. Sordid, there's a word. Sordid, something dirty, something unclean, something a little bit, possibly even immoral. The door, which was equipped with neither bell nor knocker, was blistered and disdained. Tramps slouched into the recess and struck matches on the panels. Children kept shop upon the steps. The schoolboy had tried his knife on the mouldings, and for close on a generation no one appeared to drive away these random visitors or to repair their ravages. And let's just, this once again, this deserves its own highlighting here. The door. Remember, this is the title of the chapter. And so this is the focus of the chapter. This is what Stevenson wants us to be thinking about. The door. It is blistered, disdained. It has been ravaged. Mr. Enfield and the lawyer were on the other side of By Street, and when they came abreast of the entry, the former lifted up his cane and pointed. "Did you ever remark that door?" he asked. And when his companion had replied in the affirmative, "It is connected in my mind," added he, "with a very odd story." "Indeed," said Mr. Utterson, with a slight change of voice. "And what was that?" "Well, it was this way," returned Mr. Enfield. "I was coming home from some place at the end of the world about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning." Let's just take a moment and realise that Enfield is out and about at 3 o'clock in the morning. What are people up to at 3 o'clock in the morning? Generally speaking, that's the time at which we are either abed asleep, or if we're not, often we're up to no good. Let's just pop this down. I don't know that he's up to no good, but spider senses are tingling a little bit here. Where were we? "And my way lay through a part of town where there was literally nothing to be seen but lamps, street after street, and all the folk asleep, street after street, all lighted up as if for a procession, and all as empty as a church." Interesting image there. "Till at last I got into that state of mind when a man listens and listens and begins to long for the sight of a policeman." All that dark emptiness starting to make us nervous. "All at once I saw two figures, one a little man who was stumping along eastward at a good walk, and the other a girl of maybe 8 or 10 who was running as hard as she was able down a cross street." Now, we're about to meet, or about to hear about, second-hand, third-hand, about one of the main characters of our story. And notice who we're meeting him with. It's a little girl. She's 8 or 10. Can we think of anything more innocent? Well, sir, the two ran into one another naturally enough at the corner, and then came the horrible part of the thing, for the man trampled calmly over the child's body and left her screaming on the ground. It sounds nothing to hear, but it was hellish to see. It wasn't like a man, it was like some damned juggernaut. I gave a view halloa, took to my heels, collared my gentleman, and brought him back to where there was already quite a group around the screaming child. So Enfield's taken it upon himself. I'll just catch myself up here. Enfield has taken it upon himself to catch this man. Okay. And having done so, sorry, I'm just trying to find my page. There we are. There we go. And having done so, he's brought him back. There we go. And now we get to meet Hyde. And we can see that immediately we get this sense of who he actually is and what he's like. He was perfectly cool and made no resistance, but gave me one look so ugly that it brought out the sweat on me like running. The people who had turned out were the girl's own family, and pretty soon the doctor, for whom she had been sent, put in his appearance. Well, the child was not much the worse, more frightened, according to the sawbones. And there you might have supposed would be an end to it, but there was one curious circumstance. I had taken a loathing to my gentleman at first sight. So had the child's family, which was only natural, but the doctor's case was what struck me. He was the usual cut-and-dry apothecary, with no particular age and colour, strong Edinburgh accent, and about as emotional as the bagpipe. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that actually bagpipes seem really quite emotional, actually. There's a lot of emotion behind bagpipes, but I'm not sure that's what Stevenson is saying here. Well, sir, he was like the rest of us. Every time he looked at my prisoner, I saw that Sir Sawbones turned sick and white with a desire to kill him. I knew what was in his mind, just as he knew what was in mine, and killing being out of the question, we did the next best. Look at the response that we're getting to Hyde here. Let's just take a look. So he was perfectly cool and made no resistance, but he gave a look so ugly it brought out the sweat. And let's see what he does to Sawbones. I saw that Sawbones turned sick and white with a desire to kill him. We're just going to make a little note here that Hyde brings out the worst, the most aggressive and bloodthirsty natures. Okay. I knew what was in his mind, just as he knew what was in mine, and killing him being out the question, we did the next best. We told the man we could and would make such a scandal out of this as should make his name stink from one end of London to the other. If he had any friends or any credit, we understood that he should lose them. And all the time, as we were pitching it in red hot, we were keeping the women off him as best we could, for they were as wild as harpies. I never saw a circle of such hateful faces, and there was the man in the middle, with a kind of black, sneering coolness, frightened too, I could see that, but carrying it off, sir, really like Satan. If you choose to make capital out of this accident, said he, I am naturally helpless. No gentleman but wishes to avoid a scene, said he. Name your figure. Look here, we've got the ultimate Victorian punishment. If you don't do what we want you to do, we are going to shame you. We are going to destroy your reputation. And this is the thing that is most likely to scare a gentleman in London. So we could put down here. I'm going to put down, oh, I'll just change that colour. I'm going to say threat to reputation is the biggest threat of all. Okay. Well, we screwed him up to £100 for the child's family. He would clearly have liked to stick it out, but there was something about a lot of us that meant mischief, and at last he struck. The next thing was to get the money. And where do you think he carried us but to that place with the door? There's the door again. Whipped out a key, went in, and presently came back with a matter of £10 in gold and a cheque for the balance on Coots, drawn payable to bearer and signed with a name that I can't mention, though it's one of the points of my story, but it was a name at least very well known and often printed. The figure was stiff, but the signature was good for more than that, if it was only genuine. I took the liberty of pointing out to my gentleman the whole business looked apocryphal, and that a man does not, in real life, walk into a cellar door at 4 a.m. and come out of it with another man's cheque for close upon £100. That's what happens with this door, this sinister, sinister door. But he was quite easy and sneering. Set your mind at rest, says he. I will stay with you till the bank's open and cash the cheque myself. So we all set off, the doctor and the child's father and our friend and myself, passed the rest of the night in my chambers, and next day when we had breakfasted, went in a body to the bank. I gave in the cheque myself and said I had every reason to believe it was a forgery. Not a bit of it. The cheque was genuine. Tut, tut, said Mr. Utterson. I see you feel as I do, said Mr. Enfield. I'm just going to pause for a moment because this is important to remember. We're switching around here from narrator to narrator. Now, the whole thing is told in a third-person narrative, but it flits from a different focus. So we've got following Utterson, but now we have Utterson hearing the story from Enfield. And so we've got all these layers. Pairs of storytellers. And that impacts the narrative. It might, in some cases, make it not entirely objective. It might leave stuff out. It allows Stevenson to leave stuff out, to leave questions that we have, just like Utterson probably has as well. Okay. So, I see you, Phil, as I do, said Mr. Enfield. Yes, it's a bad story, for my man was a fellow that nobody could have to do with, a really damnable man. And the person that drew the cheque is the very pink of the proprieties. Celebrated too, and what makes it worse, one of your fellows who do what they call good. So the person, we don't know officially yet who this person is, but we can probably start to guess. Person who drew the cheque. Do what they call good. Blackmail, I suppose, an honest man paying through the nose for some of the capers of his youth. Blackmail House is what I call the place with a door in consequence, though even that, you know, is far from explaining all. He added, with words fell into a vein of musing. From this, he was recalled by Utterson asking rather suddenly, and you don't know if the drawer of the cheque lives there? A likely place, isn't it? Returned Mr. Enfield. But I happen... Oh, didn't have noticed his address. He lives in some square or other. And you never asked about the place with the door? Said Mr. Utterson. No, sir, I had a delicacy, was the reply. I feel very strongly about putting questions. It partakes too much of the style of the day of judgment. You start a question and it's like starting a stone. You sit quietly on the top of a hill and away the stone goes, starting others. And presently some bland old bird, the last you would have thought of, is knocked on the head in his own back garden and the family have to change their name. No, sir, I make it a rule of mine. The more it looks like Queer Street, the less I ask. Now, of course, the word queer has got a very different connotation and different meaning in the 21st century. What he means here is peculiar, odd, unusual. And what he's saying here is, don't ask too many questions, don't pull on that thread. You start asking questions and all sorts of things can happen. And this starts to tell me, again, something about what Stevenson's big ideas are here. Because it seems to me that he's saying that reputation is based upon secrecy. Not asking too many questions because everyone has a skeleton in their closet. A very good rule too, said the lawyer. But I have studied the place myself, continued Mr. Enfield. It seems scarcely a house. There is no other door, and nobody goes in or out of that one. But once in a great while, the gentleman of my adventure, there are 3 windows looking on the court on the first floor. None below. The windows are always shut, but they're clean. And there is a chimney, which is generally smoking. So somebody must live there. And yet it's not so sure, for the buildings are so packed together about that court that it's hard to say where one ends and another begins. The pair walked on for a while in silence, and then, Enfield, said Mr. Utterson. That's a good rule of yours. Yes, I think it is, returned Enfield. But for all that, continued the lawyer, there's one point I want to ask. I want to ask the name of that man who walked over the child. Well, said Mr. Enfield, I can't see what harm it would do. It was a man of the name of Hyde. Said Mr. Utterson. What sort of man is he? He is not easy to describe. But he's going to have a go anyway. There is something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, and yet I scarcely know why. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. He's an extraordinary looking man, and yet I really can name nothing out of the way. No, sir, I can make no hand of it. I can't describe him. And it's not want of memory, for I declare I can see him this moment. Mr. Utterson again walked some way in silence and obviously under a weight of consideration. You're sure he used a key? He inquired at last. My dear sir, began Enfield, surprised out of himself. Yes, I know, said Utterson. I know it must seem strange. Fact is, if I do not ask you the name of the other party, it's because I know it already. You see, Richard, your tale has gone home. If you have been inexact at any point, you had better correct it. I think you might have warned me, returned the other with a touch of suddenness, but I've been pedantically exact, as you call it. The fellow had a key, and what's more, he still has it. I saw him use it not a week ago. Mr. Utterson sighed deeply, but said never a word, and the young man presently resumed. Here is another lesson to say nothing, said he. I'm ashamed of my long tongue, and to make a bargain never to refer to this again. With all my heart, said the lawyer. I shake hands on that, Richard. So that's the first chapter. And within this, we've already got loads and loads of information. We've got loads of information about, for example, Utterson, because we can instantly say that Utterson is self-denying. We can say that he is non-judgmental. Whereas Enfield, we know, is described as a man about town, and to some extent, a little bit of a gossip. And we can start to say about Hyde, we can start to say, brings out violent hatred. And we can say as well that he is deformed, although we don't know an awful lot about this. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. What we will do is we will return here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Come along to this channel and hopefully you'll be able to see it. If you have any questions, or if you would like to be in the Zoom meeting so that you can ask questions from there, do feel free to send me a message. I will make sure that this goes up on the site and on my website and on my Facebook page. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you so much for coming.